Hi, I'm Luke,
I'm Michael.
and this is our podcast.
So today we're going to be talking about North Korea, the kind of ongoing tensions between the United States and North Korea regarding their production of ICBM capabilities for their nuclear missiles, and just the whole conflict in general. And then the biggest question is, should we invade? Should we strike them? Should we do something besides the sanctions that we already have on them to weaken them and prevent them from having that capability? So first, I guess, quick thoughts, quick reactions, just from the news you're hearing. What do you feel about the subject, Luke?
Well, it's like a complicated subject because, part of me goes like, oh, we invaded Iraq and then we pulled out and ISIS happened. And of course, North Korea has like a huge amount of artillery just pointed at like Seoul, and they could probably strike Japan as well. So that would cause a huge number of refugees. That'd cause a lot of instability in the area. But then part of me knows that like this is just a ticking time bomb. These guys, they're testing ICBMs, and at any point, who knows, they could eventually get something that could circumnavigate our defenses, and they could shoot one at the U.S. or at some other place. And then at that point, it could be too late. So I'm like kind of on the fence. People have told me like, well, the U.S. is always constantly monitoring so that there's no danger of an ICBM attack ever being successful or whatever. But I mean, like, things slipped through the cracks, mistakes happen. So I'm just kind of, I'm on the fence. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I've been more on the fence most of the time, but I do think that, it sounds like I'm a neocon or a neoliberal or something, but I only really advocate it for this situation because I think with both, when we look at the world conflicts right now, Syria, I think the U.S. doesn't have much of a stake there. I don't think that it's worth having much of a stake there. So that conflict, I'm definitely a non-interventionist on. South China Sea, I wish we had put a little more leadership in. We had put a little more effort into building our allies and like galvanizing them to be a little more aggressive in taking those islands. But we basically conceded that to China. So that's kind of a decisive win already for China down there. And, I think that a lot of my decision on this North Korean conflict stems from that. Because I think that we already have left a lot of, we've already lost a lot of like our hegemony in Asia with us kind of losing the battle for the South China Sea and letting our allies kind of lose out on their claims. I think that's going to hurt us a lot, and I think that is going to kind of force our hand policy-wise to not let North Korea destabilize the Northeast Asia. So essentially, I am for some sort of a preventative strike or invasion even of North Korea.
Okay. And I guess just like, when is the opportune time to strike? Like, do you think that, I don't know, like, do you think we should strike like as soon as possible? Do you think we should wait a little while? Or do you think we should try and negotiate a bit?
Like, you can be a strict, hardline non-interventionist and you won't care. But I do think that there is like a strategic, and there's a strategic element which I'm advocating for, and then there's also like the most opportune like tactical element, the tactical side of it. And I think that's, I don't know. I don't know what the CIA reports are. I don't know what intelligence we have on North Korea. But I think as soon as we know that they are like very, very close to being able to have ICBM capabilities, I think then is when we should strike.
Okay.
So, obviously you don't want to strike before they're too much before, but either way, they're on that path. A lot of people don't know that, like in the 90s, actually, the Secretary of Defense for Clinton was advocating a strike, an invasion against North Korea, because that was when they were really getting their nuclear program going, and they were starting to really develop like these more short-term like missile capabilities. And then, he declined even then. So...
And I guess the big red elephant in the room, what about China?
China's the biggest key to any sort of invasion. Like, we need to have... The biggest thing I've liked from this administration is that he has been trying to communicate with China and also being aggressive with China at the same time. Like when he started off answering the phone call from Taiwan, I liked that. I thought it showed like some sort of aggressiveness, which is what we need to combat the rising power of China.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also like how he's been communicating with him a lot about this North Korea thing, trying to get them to settle it. Because I do think, ideally, the best solution would be if China took out the Kim regime, replaced it with one more stable, still friendly to China, but more stable, and then that would be the end of this issue. And then take away their nuclear arms and just give them to the Chinese arsenal or to the international board to be destroyed, whatever the case.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the ideal situation, but I don't think that's what the ideal situation is for China geopolitically.
Well, no.
So I don't think we can trust them or expect them to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's why it kind of goes back to us. So what are we going to do? And I think that we have to strike if we don't want to risk instability of the region and losing it to Chinese influence.
Okay.
And, this is like the whole theory of like the rising power. This like all goes back to this general theory, and you see it throughout all of history. It's like the rising power versus the dominant power. And, right now we are the dominant power. Right now we are the supreme unipolar person in this world. Like country in this world, I mean. But China is undeniably the country that's rising the fastest, the quickest, the most efficiently. They have a massive population. Their middle class is growing. You're actually seeing a lot of factory jobs, which is, everybody says everything's made in China, but I think you're going to see more and more things made in India, or just made in Mexico, or made in Bangladesh and other areas of Asia. I think it's a lot. We're already seeing a lot of the factories close down there because they have a growing middle class.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to continue. I mean, just if you look at the rates of their GDP from like 1980 to now, it's like a gigantic increase.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the other thing that people underestimate is I think that while China and their culture is a lot more individualistic, it's a lot more collectivist, communal, I think, and ours is obviously individualistic, I think overall, though, the purpose of both of those, we match. I think China has like their own like China dream, like the Chinese dream, like they think that they are the center of the world. They think that they are the center of civilization. They think that they are the center of culture and have always been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's similar to kind of like our American dream, our manifest destiny, where we thought, like we're the premier thing in North America, and then after we already established ourselves as the leader of the Western Hemisphere, then we kind of pushed internationally because we were like, we embody freedom. We're the beacon of democracy. We're that city upon a hill,
Right.
Like, I think that idea is similar, and I think that's different with like other powers, like Putin and Russia. Like, besides all the reasons that they are just merely like they're definitely falling. Over these next few years, they're gonna, their economy is gonna go down once oil isn't as useful to them, because that's essentially all their economy is run on. We're going to see more political infighting once Putin's gone, I think. It's basically a bunch of mobsters running a gas station is Russia. But like even more to all of the like, just the stats behind it, like going back to like one time with the American China dream, like I think Russia doesn't really have that and has never really had that. It's like a country, yes, it's majority Russian, but there's a bunch of other minorities. It's not very unified. They've never had a very clear purpose, a clear like unified goal of like what it means to be Russia, or like what the purpose of the Russian Empire is.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue maybe the Soviets had one, but I don't think you can say that really with just the Russian nation.
Right.
But yeah, and anyway, the stats back up that they're not rising. So really, the only country that makes sense for that is China.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah. So it goes back to this whole like rising power versus the dominant power, and you can see it from the very like first most recorded war by Thucydides. The Peloponnesian War, and a lot of people don't realize that after the Persian War, Athens, who had done a lot in the Persian War. Themistocles had beaten them at that last battle, the naval battle, Battle of Salamis. They were key in Marathon. Of course, the Spartans still had their Thermopylae, which gets a lot of it prestige, I guess. Mm-hmm. But the point is that the Athenians were key to defeating the Persians in the Persian Wars.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you have to put yourself in that perspective. The Spartans had been the leading hegemon of Greece and the Peloponnese especially from, most of history up to that point. They were the premier army. Nobody could beat them in land combat. They, had a lot of honor. Everybody feared them. They were the premier power.
Right.
And then Athens just, their navy really was so pivotal to beating the Persians. And they did so well that they kind of became this rising power. Plus, then you have their golden age, they have all this, they're becoming like the center of like culture, the center of like science, the center of all these like the arts, and that gives them a lot of prestige. And then economically, after the war, they actually, with the defensive pact that they had called the Delian League, they strengthened it and made it kind of like an economic union, and they had like they used their the funds collected to build their navy, which both helped the economic union because they used their navy to destroy pirate fleets and protect the trade, but Athens took a lot of the money and made these ships for themselves. So by doing it, they strengthened themselves. I think you can draw the parallel here to the U.S. I think the U.S. is similar to that. Like when they rose to the front of the world, NATO was a super powerful alliance that they created, and it helped them both stabilize the world and also made them. They kind of abused it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, like almost all of the military of NATO is the United States military, and most of it relies and is built on the United States military. So I think it's similar to that. I think our allies kind of take for granted how powerful we are, and they let us be powerful because, it benefits them economically to have to keep stability in our internationally molded world.
Right.
I think the biggest thing, though, is that when you look at the lead up to the Peloponnesian War, a lot of people don't even realize how it starts. But essentially, it's this third group, this neutral island called Corcyra. It's modern day. It's called Corfu.
Corfu.
So it's
off of Albania.
An island. It's off of Albania. Yeah, and so in the rankings at the time, there's the Delian League led by Athens, and there's the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta. A major partner in the Peloponnesian League was the Corinthians, Corinth, and they had probably the second largest navy in the Greek world, second to the Athenians, obviously. The third largest navy, though, was actually this neutral state, Corcyra. Corcyra actually had the third largest navy. So, Corinth had decided to attack Corcyra because they wanted to establish an oligarchic government. There's the Peloponnesian League was basically oligarchic dominated. The Delian League was democracy dominated. It's a very interesting parallel to this modern world with the whole regime change thing that countries try to do.
So would they fight would a Corcyra be fought by the Corinthians to simply establish a government, or would it be to gain control as well?
Well, it's a little bit of both. You know what I mean? Like when we invaded Iraq and tried to make it better, like a democracy. We're controlling it, but then we're shaping it the way we want it to be. Okay. So it's essentially just a regime change. It really is similar to the way that we do things here in the modern world, I guess.
that is almost an exact parallel.
Yeah, it really is. And so, but anyway, the point of the story though is really to say that Pericles, the leader of Athens, looked at this and he said, well, if we let Corinth defeat Corcyra, that means this third largest navy is going to be part of the Peloponnesian League. So that means the second and third largest navies in the Greek world are now going to be combined basically into one. And then we're going to be outnumbered. And so in order to prevent that from happening, he does a preventive strike. He forms a defensive alliance with Corcyra. He sends Athenian ships, and they help rout the Corinthian fleet. And then after that, tensions build up. Then they're at a full-fledged war between the two, the Peloponnesian League and the Delian League. So, I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that can go wrong in a war, and that's what happened in that war. Like Pericles died from the plague. Then new leaders came in. They did worse strategies. They were demagogues. They really didn't have any real valid strategies. So the whole war is a mess. But I mean, that's the risk you run with war. It's not controlled at all. But you have to at least look at what his original thought was. And you have to say, well, that does make sense. But then you also could look at it and be like, well, but was it really worth the risk? And so, I mean, you can go through. There's tons of examples in history. An example of one where the preventive option wasn't used is the American Civil War, where Britain and France didn't intervene to protect the Confederacy because they didn't want, they didn't want the negative press from their people for defending a slave nation.
Right.
And most importantly, they just didn't want to risk having a massive war with the United States and then making enemies for, basically the rest of history.
Yeah, the rest of history, I guess.
I mean, especially you have to think about that with the British and us nowadays, how we're such tight partners. It would be a very different world if that happened. But then you have to look at what their preventative option was, and it was to, if they win the war, split the United States essentially in two, which, is a massive geopolitical advantage for Britain and France, because it's not hard to think. You might, a lot of Americans like to say, wow, who would have thought that we were going to become a massive global power? And these people back in 1860s and 70s in Britain, and these strategists, these foreign ministers, they knew that it was going to happen. I mean, they didn't know whose side we were going to be on. They didn't know what values we were going to really have. But they knew just from the amount of land we have, the amount of immigrants we were getting, how large our population was, how fast we were industrializing. They knew that we were going to be that rising power eventually to challenge Britain. And so, a lot of them regretted that they didn't use that preventative option. But it turned out Germany became that rival instead of the United States, and we became allies with Britain. So it worked out for them in the end. So, and these are things that they could never have predicted back then at the time. So you might say, well, maybe it isn't good to use the preventive option. What I'm saying is it's very case by case.
Right.
So you have to look at how many other variables there are, how many uncontrolled variables there are, how many things that could spiral out of control. It's always going to be an element of risk, but I think you have to evaluate it like that. So, with North Korea, I think it's different than the examples you were saying with Iraq, Libya, other places we've intervened recently. I think it's a very different situation. I do think more people will obviously die, more American soldiers will die, more civilians will die, like you're saying. The refugee problem for South and North Koreans will be gigantic because China will probably be like a lot of the Middle Eastern countries and not want to take any refugees for strategic reasons, obviously, because they don't want us to really invade North Korea, or they wouldn't be happy about it. But so that would be a big issue. There's lots of negative issues. Millions of people dying is never something easy to just accept, especially as a president, to decide I'm going to do this preventive strike. It's not an act of self-defense. It's an aggressive act in order to stop a future possible aggression, not something concrete. That's a big risk to take as a president. And so it makes sense that a lot don't want to tarnish their reputation like that.
Right.
Especially when you think of recent wars. Even going back to Vietnam. The last real successful war was Korea. Which,
yeah.
It's ironic, but that's just, it's just the way it is. So I think it's worth the risk because I think that the variables are contained. We can go into that. I don't know. What do you think?
Like, as far as how are the variables contained?
I mean, I guess, like, what do you think of this whole, like, rising power theory? Because, essentially what I'm trying to argue with this rising power theory is that North Korea, if they get an ICBM, they will destabilize the region because not only will they now be able to hit Japan, like Tokyo or Seoul, with a nuclear weapon, because they already have the Scud missiles to do that. The thing is, now they have leverage against us that they could hit Australia, they could hit another one of our allies, or they could even hit the U.S. coast. And having that leverage is a massive advantage. It basically prevents us from being too aggressive with them. Like, we might even have to weaken the economic sanctions that are against them that we already have, because they can now threaten us, they can now invade, they can do other things, and then be like, if you try to stop us, we'll send a nuke your way. And even if we do have that capability, and I'm sure we do, to take out an ICBM before it hits anything, just that reaction will cause massive instability, massive fear, massive shock to both the world, but especially that region. And what you'll see, I think, is you would see a proliferation of nuclear arms. Well, Japan will start a military nuclear program, South Korea, who knows who else in the world, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the thing with the globalism, everything's so connected now. That, like, I don't think it's even just contained to that region. I think the instability goes everywhere, but it's especially, for the purposes of this discussion, especially hounded in this region. And then you have the risk of China, who is the neighbor, who's the rising power, taking all of these countries that have been under our wing to be, like, under their sphere of influence. So essentially, that's the risk I'm running. We lose hegemony, and a lot of people say, "Oh well, screw the U.S. I don't want the U.S. to be an empire, so I don't care. We don't need to risk millions of people to prevent that from happening." Right?
Yeah.
I disagree with that concept, first of all, but then also I think you have to think about it. This world order, if you're a liberal and you stand for human rights, you stand for universal human rights, you stand for what the UN does, fighting poverty, responsibility to protect, all these principles, China doesn't care about that. China doesn't, especially with your responsibility to protect and human rights. They violate it themselves, and they also always abstain or vote against Security Council resolutions and stuff regarding that. So a Chinese-led world order would not be advantageous, I think, to any liberal who's not an interventionist. So I think you always have to. I think that's another thing to qualify with. But I guess, do you think that's important? First of all, is my question to you, that China sweeps in, and then also, like, do you really think, or then do you agree with my analysis? Do you think it's actually going to cause that much instability? Like, what's your thoughts? Like, if, let's say, do you think it's important to stop them from getting ICBM?
Yeah, now that I think about it, like, even, like, you mentioned, like, there'd be huge instability in the region, but also, like, the U.S. as well. Like, could you just imagine the public outcry just upon hearing, like, North Korea just launched a nuke at the U.S., and even if it didn't hit, then, like, people would be scrambling, there'd be looting, there'd be riots, there'd be, like, we need to take care of this now, and, like, war is inevitable at that point. So, like, and, if it's inevitable, then it's better to prevent it, I would say. And, like, yeah, I think, like, in the long term, a nuclear attack, an ICBM attack from North Korea would have way worse effects than if we did a preventative strike. Like, let's say we do invade North Korea. Okay, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the places around there, maybe China, they would maybe have some more instability, but that wouldn't be as world affecting, I suppose. And at least the US is, like, still safe. You know what I mean? So I think I do kind of agree with what you're saying. Like, maybe it is better to prevent this sort of thing than just let it happen, especially with the consequences of an ICBM strike.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think there's an element of, like, how it's fought, because, like, We tried to do this in Vietnam. We tried to do this in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of factors, and there are different ones too. But there's a lot of factors that failed. Do you think that plays a risk at all? Do you think there's any? Do you identify anything that could cause it to fail? Anything that would say maybe it's not worth it? Because if there's one thing somebody could argue is that, well, if you do strike, you do invade, you're just going to cause massive instability anyway. Like, look at Iraq, look at ISIS, look at Syria, look at the whole Arab Spring.
Well, I don't think it'll be as bad because, like, for one thing, North Korea is pretty small in comparison. And if, like, let's say we do, like, completely level that place, like, I mean, for one thing, a lot of people there are already poor. So us bringing in aid would probably be, there'd probably be a lot less poverty / hunger there anyways. And, there wouldn't be any death camps like they have now. So in a way, it'd almost be beneficial. It would still there'd be a recovery, of course. But, I think after a few years with a bunch of help from the UN, a bunch of help from the US, then they could rebuild easily and be way, way better than they were before. And as far as the terrorism thing goes, like, I think the only reason people the North Koreans align themselves with the North Korean regime is because, well, propaganda, brainwash, that sort of thing. You shatter that, and then they're like, oh my goodness, they're afraid, but then we bring them food, we show them, like, hey, we're not here to kill you, we're not here to hurt you, we're just here to help. Then they're going to go, oh, okay. And, I'll take that food, why not? Because, we've got plenty of food to spare. We've got a lot of things we can give them. And also, I don't see, like, terrorism ever happening because, attacking some place like North Korea won't cause, like, a huge power vacuum where a bunch of warring factions would probably fight over it. It's not like ISIS.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I totally agree with, like, the whole, like, non-state actor element, the whole, like, jihadi terrorist global movement that could be fueled or something by this. I don't see that. Like, I don't see the Kim regime's ideology stretching internationally or, like, creating non-state actors that are trying to reestablish it. Like, I don't see that happening. I agree with that completely. I think you're definitely right. I think the people there would really appreciate the aid. Mm-hmm. I would give them when we occupy it. And then I also think, I think the biggest issue that's the question mark still is China. Because what I will say is, like, I don't think, like in Iraq, or like in the fight against ISIS, that we have to deal with, like, the Twitter, like, the impact of, like, social media, like, how important, like, Twitter and stuff is for, like, ISIS and their recruitment. Like, we don't really have to deal with that. I mean, there is no, like, technological infrastructure in North Korea. Yeah. Really. There's no real internet. Normal people certainly don't have it. Mm-hmm. And the government doesn't really have much cyber defense or cyber attack capabilities. Mm-hmm. So that's not really a factor. But then that ties in really to the whole China thing. Because, it depends, like, how... Like, China's never going to be super on board with this idea. No. But I also don't think they're going to declare war on the United States if we try to invade that.
Yeah, especially if we're, like, saying, like, ICBMs are a huge problem. Like, you saw them try to launch one. Like, we're going to deal with this now.
Well, I mean, yeah. I think they'd still claim that, like, it's our responsibility. We'll take care of it. The U.S. is being imperialist by invading. I'm sure that's something they would say. Mm-hmm. But what I'm most worried about is, like, how, because they're never going to declare an actual war and join the North Koreans physically in a military fight against us. Right. But the thing is, you don't have to do that in the world we live in today. Like, if they learned anything from the Russians, which I'm sure they have, which I already know they have the capability of doing, is they know that hacking databases, they know that disrupting government infrastructure, they know that fighting like with irregular soldiers that maybe they, like, volunteers that they send in that are insurgents, like, they've seen, first of all, what Russia is doing in Ukraine and all those tactics that they use. And I'm sure that they would probably do that against us. I don't know how effective it would be. I don't know how much it would matter because of how small North Korea is.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I still see that happening. I don't think they would ever just... I don't think you're going to see China either be completely cooperative on this or completely aggressive militarily on this. But I do think we'll see some sort of like hybrid warfare in play by China, which is an uncertainty. It's an unknown factor. It's an unknown variable. We don't know exactly how effective it is. We don't know exactly how long term it is. We don't really know what it does. So I think that is a negative against an invasion. And then I also think another negative would be if this happens, how does this reunification of Korea go? You know, like who's paying for rebuilding and creating all this new infrastructure? Who's paying for stabilizing everything? How does that all happen? How is what does Japan think of it? And I already know Japan wouldn't be happy about it because they already see the Koreans as like a big economic competitor, and then them having basically twice the amount of land to build new infrastructure and expand their business. I don't think they would be very happy about that. So, you know, we could lose a little bit of influence with Japan in the course of this. But, I mean, this still goes back to what my final decision is. And I think those are all variables that I'm willing to live with. And I think we can do our best to try to manipulate those in our favor. And I do think it's worth it to invade still.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do have to think... It is kind of important, though, to think about the public opinion in the United States. I think that's the most significant variable in this whole equation. Because I know our military can do it. Yeah, we know if they invade North Korea, they would win. There's no doubt in my mind. There's no any evidence to prove that we could lose in a military conventional conflict in North Korea. I think the biggest question is, do we lose at home? And that's with the people. And so I guess my question to you is, what do you think the people are going to say? What do you think the people's reaction would be? What would your reaction be? What would the people what would Twitter's reaction be if tomorrow we invaded North Korea?
No, it's hard to say, but I think on both sides, both the Democrats and Republicans would, except like the neocons like McCain, and I'm mostly talking about the public here, like the maybe 20 to 30-year-old who, at least, these are the people I know best, but I think they'd be against it at first. Depending on how well it goes, like they'd be like, this is just Iraq 2.0, make America the same again. These are slogans I saw just from the single set of missile strikes we sent to the Assad regime. Yeah. And, everyone was scrambling, going, this is awful. This is exactly what he said he wouldn't do, what Trump said he wouldn't do, blah, blah, blah. So I think at first there would be a lot of backlash, but, like I said, and like you said, our military can do it. I think, especially if North Korea fights conventionally, they seem to be the type to fight conventionally, at least from what I've seen with they've got the armies marching in the traditional, goose step type of thing. They've got tanks, they've got that sort of thing. So I can't imagine them not fighting, just frontline versus frontline combat. So I think that would, like we did with Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War, we'd completely eradicate them. But, as far as like the insurgents go, I think if we just quickly capture Kim Jong-Un or something like that and make him say, we lost, the war's over, then I think people on his side would just give up. So I think if we do it quickly, then we can definitely win. And we can definitely win the people's side, and people will go, oh, okay, well, it's not a big deal then.
So thing I would say against that
Mm-hmm.
is I think you're playing devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think. Yeah, I agree. First of all, that I think there would be a lot of internal dissent against it here in this country. I think a lot of people would be turned off when they heard that news.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it would actually potentially get a lot worse, public opinion wise, as the conflict goes on. I mean, if you can imagine in the first week, you hear us trying to cross the DMZ. You hear Seoul getting blown to pieces by all this artillery. You hear all these images. And there was plenty of social media in South Korea. And I guarantee you they'd be getting all of this all over Twitter, all over social media. You'll see people running around the streets of Seoul as things are getting bombed. You'll see people dying all over the place. Why did the U.S. start this? They let our city get hit. Plus all the families at home here, all the military families, you'll see casualties like you haven't seen since World War II. Mm-hmm. The military estimates themselves back in the when they were going to do that invasion in the 90s, they said you can expect about 1 million guys to die.
Jeez, that's a lot.
Because the DMZ's really heavily guarded. North Korea has nukes already. You don't know how they would use them, whether defensively or offensively. They can mobilize their entire population to fight to the last breath, and I do think they would. Mm-hmm. I think there's that much propaganda, and we can see it already with the propaganda levels just from World War II, and those were a short time period. But the Japanese Empire fought. Those soldiers fought to the last breath. I think you'd see a similar thing with the North Korean army. And I think it would be a very bloody, bloody war on both sides. And that's important because, in the American wars, when we're successful, we don't lose that many men. But I do think if you saw in the first week on the news, if people saw millions of people, soldiers dying, millions of South Koreans dying, because, that's going to happen. The DMZ is so fortified on both sides that, it's going to have, massive collateral for both sides. So I do think that a lot of people would be horrified by that. And I don't know what that means. The only thing I can look at that's similar to that, but it wasn't it wouldn't be as quick as it happened here. It would be the reaction to the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I think people's reaction to that really is what lost the war. Because a lot of people don't realize is that while we did kind of lose battles against the Viet Cong, they had thrown every man at us, every resource they had against the Tet Offensive, that when it was over, we had won. They had no army left, and if there was no public opinion change, the war would have continued, and we would have secured North Vietnam, and the war would have been over. A lot of people don't realize that they had thrown everything at us, and they achieved the desired result. The American public was totally against the war by that point. That's what lost the Tet Offensive. Mm-hmm. And so I think you could see something like that happen here. I don't know, maybe because it's so quick that it all happened so fast that the reaction by the public wouldn't have enough meaning. Mm-hmm. But you don't know. We already see such intense riots from relatively frivolous issues. Mm-hmm. Millions of people dying is who knows what kind of reaction that would cause here, even in the States. And who knows how our allies react. It's gonna be. It'd be there'd be a seismic shift no matter what from doing this decision. And then I do want to just touch back on that one point you made, which I thought was interesting about insurgents and stuff.
Yeah.
First of all, I wonder if China will actually send men on the ground. Kind of like Russia does in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They pretend to be insurgents when they're really just Russian soldiers. I could see China doing something like that. The other thing which I actually could really see happening is I could see China using their information warfare capabilities to do what Russia also does in Ukraine, which is what their first step always in the Russian hybrid military model is flood it with the information war aspect, which is you flood it with pro-Russian propaganda. You flood it with the Ukrainian government is against you. the Ukrainian government is harassing you as a ethnic Russian. They are, just a bunch of, like, I guess it's fake news, I guess is the term.
Yeah.
But either way, it's very effective. It's an information warfare. And, it works. And that's what causes, like, the initial real insurgents and the people to, like, kind of change their natural position that they've had in the state of Ukraine. And I think you could see something similar here where maybe during the occupation movement, once you see social media start coming in to North Korea, once you see everybody starting to build up North Korea and the North Korean people maybe are... Because, there is that question that maybe once Kim Jong-Un would be deposed, we would turn to, like, and create a temporary democracy in North Korea.
Yeah.
And, if that information warfare is effective, those people could say, we don't identify with South Korea and we don't want reunification. And that would be, that'd be a problem. Then there's a massive problem.
Uh-huh.
And, that could be disastrous having that. Because then, at that point, South Korea, who had just lost millions of their own soldiers and people, would be like, hell no. We just fought this war, and we're going to reunify you.
Mm-hmm.
But then, that's very imperialist of us to aid in a conquest, then, of a certain people. So, there's a lot of ways this could be framed against us, especially in the modern day age.
Yeah.
No, I think it's they don't have that inherent advantage right now because North Koreans don't really have access to the social media. I don't think that China could do much in the information warfare aspect of it. But it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. Like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, I mean, I have a hard time seeing the North Koreans going, no, we don't want this because, even like I said, there are a lot of poverty, a lot of starving people. So just say like, hey, just stick with this, so South Korean way and you'll be golden. But like, I guess it's possible that there are definitely a lot of people who truly do believe in, maybe, I don't know, but maybe there are some people who do believe in like the Kim Il-sung way of thinking.
But see, I think it's more than that because, like, I do think there are just because think about how long they've been able to run that propaganda. I mean, these are generations that have been raised entirely by the North Korean Kim Jong-Un, well, the Kim dynasty,
Il something,
the Kim dynasty like policies and belief system. But I think the most important thing is you create, which is something they already all have and they already all know, is that they are North Koreans right now. Mm-hmm. And they have been North Koreans since like the 1950s. And there is no, the concept of being a unified Korea might be too distant to them now, especially with the way they've been isolated for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the question really, is it going to be like the situation in East Germany where they, East and West Germany very quickly, once the wall fell and once the Soviet Union fell, rejoined and became a unified Germany again? Or is it, is it not going to be like that?
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, we might be assuming too much. I think you might have to... I mean, once again, that's part of your intelligence, I guess. But I do think that's a hard thing to measure. So I think that's just another unknown variable that you have to... that you'd be rolling the dice on.
Yeah. Okay, so one other thing I want to touch on is, like, so we talked about, like, sending troops after North Korea and, crossing the DMZ. So I was thinking, like, is it possible that we could do something, a little different, like naval invasions? Or maybe just not even make it a manned invasion, really, at first, just completely drone strike the place, make them submit that way, and then go... we're going to invade now.
That's true. Like, the tactical options, like, there's so many. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the military... I'm sure the military has plan A through Z of how to invade North Korea already.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they've been thinking about that for the past
since the 50s.
Years,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But... that's true, but I think there's one undeniable thing, and that the artillery station in the mountains near the DMZ, the North Korean side, can absolutely hit Seoul, can absolutely hit our forces stationed at the DMZ. So, Are you going to abandon the DMZ and let the North Koreans come into South Korea? Or, like, they're still going to be fighting at the DMZ, and I think that's where you'll probably see the highest casualty numbers. And, like, sure, they could definitely do, like, some sort of flanking naval invasion. I'm sure they have something like that planned, or, some heavy bombing. You can guarantee that we would do heavy bombing. But, the North Koreans are going to hit as hard as they can with what they have.
Right.
Like, I think you can be 100% sure of that. So
I guess my question is, like, I don't really know much about the artillery in the mountains by the DMZ. So, like, is that, like, not something we can strike with drones? Like, I mean, we've got to have so many drones.
A lot of it's hidden. A lot of it we don't know is exactly is where. I mean, the area is actually very heavily forested. I've heard from some people, too, is that, like, there's also these big patches of these forests in the DMZ that are just littered with mines. And I mean thousands of mines. Like, mines, they claim, like, mines every, like, foot. You have a mine. Like, they claim things like that. Yeah. And I mean, nobody really knows. I actually heard this one guy. He kind of was a cynical dude. He's a vet, and he was saying, like, when I was in North Korea, I actually asked the guy. I was like, if there's all these mines in this big field of forest in here, how come, like, when a tree, like, falls or something, it doesn't blow off everything? And then they're just like, I don't know. I guess they just don't hit. And, he thought maybe there aren't mines there. But this guy's, he's a kind of a conspiracy nut.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, it's like, the point is, I'm sure, like, that would be a long slog. Lots of people are going to die on both sides, no matter what happens at the DMZ. That's what makes this conflict so, like, heated. Because, like, with Iraq in the first war, and even in the second, with a conventional aspect, it was much easier to, like, we knew we could just invade. We didn't have to worry about, like, protecting anything. We didn't have to hold a line that was heavily fortified. We had lots of options to invade then. This, there's gonna be people that die. A lot of civilians and a lot of military people. South Koreans and North Koreans, and then also Americans.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But I guess my last thing with you, do you think this problem's really worth solving? Do you really think China is this opportunistic? Do you think, like, should we, I guess my question is, do we have to strike, or should we really put our hope that China decides to, go in, depose the regime itself, establish a friendly puppet that's not the Kim dynasty, that's more stable? Like, do we really believe and work with them to try to do something like that? Which, because that option, us both agreeing, I mean, you can do the whole game theory, prisoner's dilemma, that's what they say. Us cooperating and continuing to cooperate is just better for both parties in the end. I mean, less people will die. Situation will be more or less the same, just more stable, which is, really keeps both sides happy.
Right.
China still has their puppet. We don't have to worry about North Korea destabilizing the region with a nuke. Both sides are happy. But, so I guess the question is China going to defect from the cooperation? Like, we don't know. But, I guess, like, what do you think? Do you think it's worth rolling the dice on either of them? Like, which one would you choose? Which is riskier to you? What would you do if you're Donald Trump sitting in the White House?
I don't know. Like, about the whole China thing, though, like you said, China is rising. They're like on the trajectory to probably be, stronger than the United States at some point if they keep going the way they're going. So, now that I think about it, like, if I were, instead of thinking I'm Donald Trump, let's imagine I'm the leader of China.
Okay.
And I'm seeing, and I'm seeing North Korea do this stuff. And, I'm seeing that there is a risk of the U.S. invading, getting involved in all these millions of people dying, which will inevitably bring refugees to China, whether we want them or not. It will cause problems. It will cause instability. So if I were the president of China right now, I'd be doing my best to keep this whole ICBM thing down so that this doesn't happen. Because, if North Korea isn't armed or it doesn't have nuclear capabilities, whatever, we're China. Like, we've got nuclear capabilities and we're way larger. They're just a speck of sand. We're like a huge-ass mountain comparatively. So, like, if I were just China, I'd be like, okay, let's bide our time. Let's, like, if we are going to get into conflict with the U.S., let's wait till we know we can win. So North Korea, you stop what you're doing, or else, and, maybe in the future when we're ready, we'll let you do this. But, I just can't see, if I were the Chinese president, I wouldn't see myself letting this happen. I'd try and bide my time, try and get stronger, try to make, and, I would depose the government if I had a choice. Okay.
I mean, I think that's definitely a good way to think about it. China doesn't have any rush to be a superpower, the world superpower. They can just keep increasing steadily their military, their economy, whatever they need to do. They're not really in a rush to get into like a climactic war over world hegemony or something with the United States. I agree with that. But, I do think that there's also the chance that they could get really leap started on that path. If the U.S., if North Korea gets ICBM and, they can, whether they launch it or not, it's just going to create more instability. The world's going to start, I think you'll see more nuclear proliferation. And I think all of that benefits China because anything that cracks holes into the current U.S. state of the world order, I think benefits them in the long run.
Okay.
But, I don't trust Xi when I hear he's negotiating with Trump about dealing with Kim. I don't know. I think he could be letting Kim kind of just do what he wants. Because, it kind of helps him in the long run.
Okay, I see.
I mean, I do think there's a risk, too. I think when you look at it from the Chinese perspective, he might be like, he might think about more like you, Let's just build up our military. Let's do this. We're in no rush. Let's work with the U.S. for now. While they have this very clear advantage over us. And let's just replace the Kim dynasty. Let's put somebody else more stable in there so we don't lose any ground against the U.S. And the other thing is just too risky. There's too many unknown variables. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't want a powerful North Korea. I mean, we don't want a powerful unified Korea. Let's not let Kim stay in power any longer. So, it's, who knows? Like, it really just depends on how aggressive and how conservative Xi is and his advisors. I guess, I mean, like, and even that, it's hard to predict. I mean, they were pretty aggressive in claiming what they wanted in the South China Sea.
True.
So they're pretty aggressive in their response, wording-wise at least, to to Trump answering the phone from Taiwan. So, but at the same time, they're also the fact that he's talking with Trump and stuff. I don't know if it's just deceptive, but it seems like Xi doesn't seem like he's trying to push the border too fast, I guess, with like what his plan is for China. Because he knows he doesn't have to. I don't know. But we'll see. I mean, I think North Korea is a problem that has lasted a very, very long time in the world. And I think that I personally think that the U.S. is just inevitably going to lose hegemony anyway. And I think this is a way for them to kind of get that power back, have a great story of unifying the Koreas, pushing back Chinese influence, which is a nice win and kind of contains them. But of course, I don't have the intelligence that the president and other people in power do, and I don't have, I don't have the best knowledge of how the North Korean people's psychology is. I think that's the really important element.
Right.
Because the worst thing that could come out of this is a North Korea that doesn't want to reunify with South Korea and instead is democratic but supports, it's keeping its ties with China. So you'd lose millions of men essentially over something that wasn't really worth losing millions of men. So that would just be a setback. That would set us back dramatically.
Right.
And, I'd have to have that intelligence, but as of now, I would say I think it might be worth it.
Okay.
To take that preventive war option.
Yeah.
And just go for it.
Just go for it.
While we have that superior, while we can.
Mm-hmm.
I don't advocate it anywhere else, but it's the only situation that I have this unique position on, I guess. But I guess your final conclusion here?
Yeah, I'm sort of the same way, I think. But yeah, there's just a lot of variables, like you said, and yeah, I can't, even though I'd say I'm leaning towards invasion, I still think I'm sort of in the middle. I'm still kind of on the fence. I'd still, like you mentioned, if something bad, they don't want to reunify happens, then that sounds like an actual possibility. So that just kind of scares me just thinking about it. So I'm not sure yet, but yeah I guess we'll see what happens.
I guess really my bottom line would be, I think I'm pretty confident that if they obtained an ICBM that functioned, they would definitely use it to expand their power, thus destabilizing that region and us losing influence over our allies, which leads to an acceleration of Chinese dominating Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying with the whole American dream, the whole manifest destiny thing, when China has a similar thing. I think you're seeing that in Southeast Asia with the South China Sea. I think they believe this is our region. This is our neighborhood. The U.S. can get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're going to say that. I think them being able to do that in Northeast Asia would be massive for them in establishing that. I mean, we had the Spanish-American War basically over that. So, I mean, we very adamantly wanted Europeans out of Western Europe. I mean, out of the Western Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think China does believe that too. I think they believe that is their region. That should be their responsibility to control that. And I think that was our first step towards pushing our international agenda that we do after World War II. And I think that would be China's first step in pushing their own international agenda in the late future.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess, where my bottom line is. That's why if the intelligence gives me enough of a reason to, I would do it.
Okay.
Pull the trigger. But anyway, hope you guys like this.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little deep foreign policy on an issue. It's my favorite area, probably. I don't know. We definitely have plenty of social issues, though, in this country. So we'll probably do one of those next. Hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah.
I had a fun time on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Been writing a lot actually about this North Korean conflict, so I have tons of these ideas, all these variables I'm analyzing in my head. So this is a nice way for me to just stream of consciousness almost explain it all.
Yeah.
But
I enjoyed it too. It was a lot to think about, certainly, and it's very pertinent to what's happening now. So yeah, thanks guys for listening.
I mean, with Trump, we never know. We thought he was non-interventionist. And he was fine with doing a little bit of intervention in Syria, so we don't know.
We don't know.
He's another unknown. As much as we don't know about Xi, we know even less about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see.
All right. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching.